It seems to me that Christians may often make the mistake of emphasizing Jesus as the son of David while forgetting that he's also the son of Joseph.
One of the 13 principles of Jewish faith is we look forward to the coming of the Messianic era. And if you look out your window and this is what it looks like for the Messiah to have come, you have missed the entire picture.
And I wonder if Jacob here doesn't have a point. No, I don't think we're missing the whole picture. I wonder if we both have different sides of the same picture, maybe. Because I hear this when I talk with Jewish friends of mine. It seems clear that, the Messiah hasn't come because things are not all as well. And so as I've explored the theme of Joseph and how Joseph ties to the person Jesus, it almost feels like you're sort of like, yeah, I need to complete the picture. I need to complete the image of the Messiah who's seemingly, at least from a Christian perspective, he's both a lion and a lamb, which actually will take me all the way into the book of Revelation. And so I think when we do that, I'm more and more convinced that we have a coherent answer to a problem or a coherent image that will help us move forward here. And so I want to play a couple of clips from David Mitchell and his work on Messiah, son of Joseph.
The greatest secret of Rabbinic Judaism is Messiah ben Yosef. Messiah ben Yosef appears throughout Rabbinic literature. He is a Messiah who comes from Galilee to die, pierced by wicked foes at the gate of Jerusalem. After he dies, Israel are scattered among the nations, but his death confounds Satan, atones for sin, and abolishes death itself, and then he is raised to life again. Now, anyone with the least idea of what divides the Abrahamic faiths must find it remarkable that such a figure exists in Jewish literature. Yet he is there, in hundreds of passages, in scores of documents of every kind, in the Targums and Talmud, in the homiletic and exegetic Midrashim, in the apocalyptic Midrashim and the Zohar. He appears in Jewish literature of every genre and period. But where did this Messiah ben Yosef come from? Well, he arises from three prophecies in the books of Moses, that is, in Genesis chapter 3 and 49, and in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Let's see what they say.
So David actually starts with Genesis 3:15, which does give you an image of someone who will come, born of a woman, who will conquer the serpent, the seed of the serpent, but will receive a wound. And so that's where the beginnings of this idea of a suffering or wounded Messiah, that's where they begin, and then it sort of develops from there.
So this prophecy foretells that the Messiah is to suffer. But it does not say that he is to come from Joseph. For that, we must go to the end of Genesis. On our way through the book of Genesis, we read the story of Joseph, the blameless youth, beloved by his father. He is thrown into a pit and sold into virtual death by his jealous brothers. But he rises again to be vizier of Egypt and to save his people. His father Jacob foretells on his deathbed the future of all his sons. He says, "Gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in the last days." His prophecy to Judah is well known. Kings will come from Judah until one called Shiloh appears to rule the nations. But his prophecy to his darling Joseph is less well known. It runs like this. A fruitful shoot is Joseph, a fruitful shoot upon a spring, whose branches ran over the wall. They attacked him and shot at him. They hated him, the bowmen. But his bow remained steady, and the arms of his hands became supple, from the hands of the might of Jacob. From thence will come a shepherd, rock of Israel. From the God of your father, who shall help you, and from Shaddai, who shall bless you. Now note three things here. First, Joseph will be exceedingly fruitful. His branches, his offspring, will climb over the wall. This is what Jacob already said to Joseph's son Ephraim in the chapter before. He said, his seed shall fill the nations. And this happened when Joseph's children were scattered by Assyria in 722 BC, and they really did begin to fill the nations. Second, Jacob recalls the bitter arrows of Joseph's fate, his brother's treachery, the slaver's whips, Potiphar's wife's lies, and he says that Joseph overcame all these things by the hand of the mighty God of Jacob. Third, Jacob foretells that from thence, that is, from the God of Jacob, from Shaddai, from thence there will arise to Joseph a great hero, a shepherd rock of Israel. This hero is called a shepherd because he will be a just and good ruler, and he is called a rock or stone because he will be a strong defence forever. Now, it is not actually said that the shepherd rock will be Joseph's biological son, just as it is not actually said that Shiloh will be Judah's biological son. They are simply heroes promised to each tribe. But since the patriarchs typologically portray their tribes, we may infer that what happened to Joseph will happen also to his shepherd rock. Just as Joseph was beloved, blameless, betrayed, buried, and exalted, so will it be with the shepherd rock. He too, beloved by his father, will be betrayed by his brothers and buried, but will rise again to be vizier of the world.
So there we have the Joseph story, and I think what I'm attempting to do here is to even push past the idea that Joseph is just a type of Christ or a foreshadowing of Jesus as the Messiah. It is that, but it seems like there's more there. There's more to this story, and the Bible sets it up for this to be revealed, I think. And there's a few other things that I wanted to bring in as far as context. We'll get back to David Mitchell, and I'm actually going to bring in some of the book of Revelation as well, again, to sort of paint this whole picture. So if you're hanging out at this point, thanks for being here. It's kind of a deep dive. I'm trying to put as much into one video as possible. It's probably a mistake. But as if anything I say spurs on an idea, I would love to hear that from you, because again, this is me sharing kind of my process and where I am. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that in a community of people who know more than I do. So Joseph. Okay, so this is going to come back to us. This is going to get really interesting. I find a few other elements of Joseph's story compelling. One is that, his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, share his double portion, and as Israel is blessing them, he blesses the younger son first. Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, and who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh, his hands crossing over, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. And this comes into play as Israel's divided kingdom, and Ephraim goes into the nations. David Mitchell already said that the northern kingdom goes into the nations, and that becomes a really interesting theme. The younger blesses the older, becomes a blessing for the older. I can't help but think of what Paul says about the wild olive branch being grafted into the native olive branch, and I'll try to do my best to leave Bible passages and stuff like that in the description. But there you have this right there, and then you realize that the northern kingdom of Israel is going to go into the nations before Judah, before the southern kingdom, and then the theme of the nations, the theme of the Gentile nations, actually begins. It's like, where did these kids come from? Well, when Joseph was in Egypt, he takes a wife who is a Gentile. She's an Egyptian, and so Ephraim and Manasseh are half Gentile. And it's interesting that Joseph saves Egypt first, and the overflow of that ends up saving Israel. you're picking up on what I'm saying, like this wild olive branch, this younger son, these Gentile, this Jewish man who is put into a Gentile nation is then raised to the right hand of the king, and ends up saving Israel because he saved the Gentile nations. Again, the northern kingdom going into the nations. So I find that to be a fascinating picture. And then you can pick up the story with his brothers when he restores the community and the family. And that is something that Dr. Warren Gage is going to speak to in this next clip. So I want to share that with you guys.
I think what is intended is that we're going to understand that what other people have done to us, meaning evil or harm, God had intended it and ordained it as well, but not for evil purposes, but for good. This is the lesson of Joseph, who had been massively betrayed by his brothers who wanted to put him to death, and sold as a slave to the land of death, where he would not see his father. He'd have no community of faith. They were hoping to be rid of him forever. So Joseph suffered as a 17-year-old boy. He was cast away, but he maintained his faith, his strong faith. He believed his dreams would still be fulfilled. His dreams were that his brothers would bow down to him, and so he went on in life, and God lifted him up and exalted him and gave him a name above all others. It's clear that Paul is thinking of Christ in Philippians 2, but he's also thinking of Joseph. He gave him a name that at the name of Jesus every knee would bow, and Pharaoh had commanded that at the name of Joseph every knee would bow. And finally, the knees of his brothers bowed before him. And, he spoke to them, of course, in disguise, because he tested them to see if they'd learned to love one another. And when he saw that they had learned to love one another, at that point he reveals himself to his brothers and says, "I'm Joseph, your brother." And Moses says they fell back from him, thinking that, their doom had come. When they recognized him in terror, that he had the power of life and death over them. And then he calls them to come to him. He collects them. He says, "Come near," and they come near. And you can imagine him embracing them all. And he tells them, "Don't be afraid." In full forgiveness, he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. He had found his peace in the sovereignty and the providence of God, who had intended that. And he said, "He sent me ahead of you to prepare a place for you in the years of famine that had been ordained." And they would be provided for and cared for in that wilderness. He sent me before you to prepare a place. Joseph is such an amazing type of Christ. But in any case, when Joseph calls his brothers to himself, these are the 12 sons of Jacob. And you can imagine that embracing in Egypt. That is a very direct type of the gates of this heavenly city. The gates of the heavenly city that it's built upon the foundations, the 12 foundations of the apostles. But the gates are named for the same 12 sons of Jacob. And 3 to a side, 4 sides, they are all embracing themselves. It's one big group hug of forgiveness and restoration and redemption. The opposite gates are Joseph and Judah, by the way. Judah's the one who had betrayed his brother and sold him for silver, anticipating Judas, which is his name in Greek, by the way. But that emblem, that first emblem of the gates of the heavenly city, is found in the story of Joseph. And the lesson we learn there is that what people had meant for evil, God meant for good.
Okay, so it's really interesting that Dr. Gage is in the book of Revelation, looking at the heavenly city. God is going to restore all things, right? And even in Revelation chapter 5, you get this lamb and lion imagery that I brought up at the very beginning. John is told to look at the lion from the tribe of Judah, and when he turns, he sees the lamb. And so this heavenly city has these walls and these gates, and the gates correspond to the way Israel would have encamped around the tabernacle. And it's interesting that there's this sort of group hug, and there's this regathering of those tribes. And of course, Ephraim would be one of those. And this is Ezekiel 37. And this theme kind of shows up in a lot of places, and some will say, well, this is exclusive to Israel, and I'm going to make the case that it's not. This is a global thing. and always was meant to be that way. You can go back to Joseph's wife. The word of the Lord came again to me saying, Son of man, take for yourself one stick and write on it for Judah, southern kingdom, and for the sons of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, the northern kingdom, and all the house of Israel and his companions. Then join them for yourself, one to another, into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. When the sons of your people speak to you, saying, will you not declare to us what you mean by this? Why are you joining this stick? Then say to them, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions, and will put them with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they will become one in my hand. The stick on which you write will be in your hand before your eyes. So say to them, Thus says the Lord, Behold, I will take the sons of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation and one land. I will gather them from among the nations. Is this just God bringing back faithful Israel? Or is this God bringing the Israel who are not all descendant of Israel, as Paul writes about? Romans 9:6. But it is not as though the word of God has failed, for they are not all Israel who descended from Israel, nor are they all children because they are Abraham's descendants. But through Isaac your descendants will be named, through the promised blessing. So it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are regarded as descendants. The promise, Abraham's faith, was reckoned to him as righteousness. And this is where we follow this Joseph Messiah idea from Joseph through Ephraim, through the northern kingdom, to Joshua. Joshua follows Moses. Jesus' name is Joshua. He's literally Joshua, the son of Joseph. So, Joshua, the son of Nun, whose book is the first of the prophets, the law, then the prophets. So Joshua does what Moses, the lawgiver, could not accomplish. It had to be done by someone else, a Joshua, a deliverer who could bring his people into the promised land. The law was not strong enough to do that. Moses was not strong enough to do that. There's a greater prophet who comes, greater than Moses, who leads his people into the promised land. There's just something to that. And so that's where I think I want to pick back up with the work of David Mitchell, continuing these themes. You'll see them start to pop up all over the place.
And lest anyone imagine that I am just making all this up, I refer you to Ramban's commentary on Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. He says there that Joseph's shepherd rock is the Holy One himself, and the rock rejected by the builders of Psalm 118, and a great commander like Joseph's son Joshua. And Ramban himself is hoping for this second Joshua to come, even in the 13th century, and restore the Holy Land to Israel. So Ramban thought the shepherd rock was to be a Messiah and a second Joshua. So Genesis 3:15 foretells the coming of a suffering hero, the seed of the woman. And in Genesis 49, we understand that this hero, now called the shepherd rock, will suffer like Joseph, and then perhaps be a second conquering Joshua. But it is Moses who joins all these ideas permanently together in his prophecy about the tribes of Joseph. On the plains of Moab, Moses pronounces his great valedictory blessing on Israel. He has much more to say to the tribes of Joseph than to any other tribe. And at the end of his colossal blessing on Joseph, he says this: "The firstborn of his shore is Joseph's majesty, and the horns of a ram are his horns. With them he shall gore the peoples all as one, even to the ends of the earth. And these are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and these are the thousands of Manasseh." Here Moses compares the tribes of Joseph to two oxen, the shore and the ram. But of course, it's not about oxen at all. It is really about an individual, a hero, a descendant of Joseph, who will be Joseph's majesty or glory. And this hero is compared to an ox, or more precisely, to two different species of oxen, the shore and the ram. The shore and the ram are very different beasts. The shore is the bos taurus, or domestic ox. He is a bearer of burdens, a slave. But even more, Joseph's shore is the firstborn of a shore. In Israelite law, the firstborn of a shore was born under sentence of a violent sacrificial death, as we read in Numbers 18:17. "The firstborn of a shore you shall not redeem. They are holy, sprinkle their blood upon the altar." No Israelite could fail to understand the bloody implications of being born the firstborn of a shore. The ram, on the other hand, is quite a different beast. He is the bos primigenius, or aurochs, the Eurasian wild ox. The aurochs is now extinct, but to those who knew it in olden days, the aurochs was a truly fearsome beast. So there is a total contrast between the firstborn of a shore and a ram. What one is, the other is not. One is lowly, enslaved, and bound to slaughter. The other is sovereign, free, and bound to life. Therefore, Joseph's shore and ram represent one individual who is to undergo transformation. But even in his lowly state, Joseph's shore was intrinsically glorious. As it is said, he is Joseph's majesty, and that is why he is finally transformed and given the majestic horns of a ram, and being crowned with the horns of the ram, the humble shore becomes the ram. How does one destined to sacrifice become triumphant? Clearly, it's not by evading his fate. Dereliction of duty is not the hero's way. No, the path to glory must be through the destiny of sacrifice and death. Does this then mean some kind of post-mortem resurgence? But who is this hero of whom Moses speaks? Well, the easy bit is the horns. We are told plainly, they are his tribesmen. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. But who is the one who wields these horns? The rabbinic sages offer three answers. The first is Joseph. The blameless lad was forced into slavery, pierced by cruelty, and buried in pits and dungeons. Yet his affliction gave life to Israel. Then he was raised to freedom, life, and sovereignty. Yet there is one snag. The firstborn of Joseph's shore cannot be Joseph himself. It must be someone else. So could the firstborn shore perhaps be Joseph's descendant Joshua. Joshua sprang from the line of Ephraim, from Joseph, and Joshua too knew lowliness and exaltation. Though he was an Ephraimite prince, though the sun stood still at his command, he did not join the rebellious, but he served Moses until he was appointed prince and commander of Israel. Like Joseph, his sacrificial humiliation gave life to Israel, and he rose to honour. Yet again, there is a difficulty. Joshua did not gore the peoples all as one to the ends of the earth. He merely fulfilled his own remit, the conquest of the 7 nations of Canaan. So there is, therefore, a third interpretation, and this is the most popular of all among the rabbis. The firstborn shore is a Mashiach, like Joshua, who is yet to come. In fact, such a figure is implicit in the text itself, from the discrepancy between Moses' prophecy and the limited nature of Joshua's conquest. For while Joshua's conquest was modest in extent, Moses' hero was promised the conquest of the whole earth. And so the idea inevitably arose of a greater Joshua who would fulfill the promise entirely, namely, Messiah ben Yosef.
So shout out to David Mitchell. Again, links will be below. I want to look at this passage in Deuteronomy a little bit closer, just give you my thoughts again, share with me what you're thinking at this point. but let it come to the head of Joseph, to the crown of his head. So the ox, the native like this native ox, this domestic ox is actually given the crowns of the wild ox, which I thought was interesting. It is sort of a transformation, so I don't want to. I think I acknowledge that side of it, but it does seem like it's given the crown anyway. His horns are the horns of a wild ox. So, and with them he pushes the people all at once to the end of the earth. This was something that I thought was interesting. He needs these horns. So this sort of domestic ox needs the horns of the wild ox to push the people, all of the people together, all of the people as one, so again, this to me seems like nations language, the gathering of the nations, the gathering of Israel, the reference to Romans 9, Israel as all of Israel, not just native born, born of the flesh of the sons of Abraham, but the nations all at once to the ends of the earth. And these are the 10,000s of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh. Again, the connection, at least that I'm drawing between the northern kingdom going out into the nations, and then sort of being lost there. I wanted to, I asked Grok, to give us some images that we could. This is the extinct aurochs, and just how big it would have been, I guess, or at least according to Grok. But again, sort of these horns, this crown, these horns that would gore and push and essentially collect the nations together as one. I just thought was very interesting. And then you can look at the work of Jason A. Staples, and Matt C. actually turned me onto this. I'm going to read a little summary of just like an epic thread that Matt posted. You can find it on X as well. Both Israel and Judah are called my people is particularly significant in light of Hosea's declaration that the northern kingdom is not my people. So that's the nations. Ephraim has become not my people, a declaration certainly known to Jeremiah and to Paul, again, Romans 9, Jeremiah 3:8. Jeremiah 3 explains that Judah's treachery has proven faithless Israel more righteous than Judah, leading God to call out faithless Israel, promising that he will restore even the faithless, divorced northern kingdom because of the disobedience of Judah. Significantly, Gentiles are not mentioned in Jeremiah's prophecy. The covenant will be made only with Israel and Judah. Thus, if Paul thought that the new covenant was being fulfilled, he should have been expecting the miraculous return of the northern tribes, right? Instead, he's enraptured by the mystery of the circumcision-free justification of the Gentiles, while still insisting that he's preaching to the fulfillment of Jeremiah's new covenant. Keep in mind, Jeremiah's northern tribes are referred by their largest Josephite Ephraim tribe. This is where the pieces snap together. Paul's mystery is that faithful Gentiles, those with the law written on their hearts, are the returning remnant of the house of Israel, united with the faithful from the house of Judah. That's the two rods coming together. Paul gives us also Hosea, identifying faithless Gentiles with the returning house of Israel, obviously assigns much more significance to Romans 9, where after first declaring natural ancestry a insufficient criterion for covenant membership. Did I miss one? And defending God's justification in election Paul quotes Hosea's words to Ephraim, demonstrating that God is calling his elect, whom he called not only from Jews, but also from Gentiles, as he also says in Hosea, I will call my people those who are not my people. Why Hosea Paul is not quoting haphazardly the terrible message of Hosea is that God is cutting off the northern kingdom. It has been mixed among the people. The chosen people of God no longer. Hosea's Ephraimite kingdom is essentially become Gentiles. Israel, the northern kingdom, is swallowed up. They are now in the nations like worthless vessels, Hosea 8:8. So Paul takes the radical step of identifying faithful, uncircumcised Gentiles with the not my people being restored to Israel as promised in Hosea. This is to say, as promised, Ephraim's seed is being restored from among the nations, being redeemed from its cut off Gentile state, becoming children of the living God once again. Moreover, God has proven for the salvation of the Gentiles by scattering Ephraim among the nations only to be restored. In saving Ephraim, God saves the nations. In saving the nations, God saves Ephraim and restores the nation, restores Israel. I don't know where do you go? That is just, that's the image of this wild ox. It would seem that is why there is a wild ox gathering people. Well, it's actually not a wild ox. It is the domestic ox that has been given the horns of a wild ox. Okay, so and again, I go back to the native and the non-native olive branch. The non-native olive branch is then grafted in. A wild olive branch is grafted in. But there's more, and David Mitchell is going to kind of summarize that. So thank you for hanging in there. We're digging in. We're digging in. Hopefully it's all making sense. Hopefully I've put this together and organized it so that all the little pieces are still kind of together and not completely scattered to the wind. And if you made it to this point and you're like, Pete, it's totally scattered, I have no idea what you're talking about, let me know and I'll try again.
And so Moses' prophecy gathers up and unites the prophecies of Genesis 3 and 49. Just as the seed of the woman is to suffer and then save mankind, just as the shepherd rock is to be buried and betrayed, like Joseph, before he rules, so Joseph's firstborn Shor is to suffer and die as a sacrifice before he reappears again, sovereign and free, to conquer the world. So Messiah ben Yosef is no rabbinic invention. He is already there, dying, rising and conquering in Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, in the great blessings of Bereshit and Devarim.
Let's look at Habakkuk chapter 3. He's prophesying around the time of the Babylonian rise to power, at the end of the 7th century BC, just before they invade Jerusalem. And he's terrified and frightened at this impending Babylonian invasion. And he looks to the past. And he says in chapter 3, verses 11 to 13, he says, the sun and moon stood still in their place at the light of your arrows as they sped. At the flash of your glittering spear, you marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations in anger. You went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your Mashiach, your Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Anointed in English.
Your anointed one. And he looks to the past when the Lord God made the sun and moon stand still to deliver his people and save his anointed Messiah. Which Mashiach, which Messiah, which anointed one is Habakkuk talking about? Who is this? It can only be the one for whom the sun and the moon stood still. For whom did the sun and the moon stand still? Only for Joshua when he fought the Amorites in Joshua chapter 10. So Habakkuk is calling Joshua the Messiah. And the Greek translation, what we call the Sexta translation, makes this absolutely clear for anybody who missed the reference. You went out to save your people by Joshua, your Messiah. And therefore, Habakkuk sees the former deliverance. He sees Joshua as a picture, as a type of the Messiah. And he is looking for another deliverance to come. Namely, he longs for another Joshua Messiah, a Josephite prince from the tribe of Joseph in Ephraim to do to the Babylonians what Joshua did to the Amorites. He is looking for a Joshua Messiah.
So I just want to quickly transition from the work of David Mitchell in the Old Testament to, once again, Dr. Warren Gage and the book of Revelation in the New Testament. And again, I just want to reiterate the idea of the advent of the Messiah and the second coming of the Messiah. The Lamb and the advent, still the Son of David, but then the second coming as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Very interesting stuff from Dr. Gage as he ties the book of Joshua to the book of Revelation.
When he says the name Jesus, he's talking about the name Joshua. Why the first century Christians thought that was so significant. It was told to Mary and Joseph, you will call his name Joshua. Why? Of all the people that he could have been named after, why Joshua? Because he will save his people from their sins. Well, who is it that Joshua saves? And that's the story of Jericho. We'll talk about who is it that Hosea saves. It's, which is his other name. He's commanded, the God's holy prophet, commanded to save a woman of harlotry. So there's a sub-theme going through the scripture. So we'll talk about all of that. So what is the significance? What is the story that comprehends from beginning to end, from the first chapter of Revelation to the 22nd chapter? We want a template, we want a pattern here. And the story that's being told, if you put away all of the distractions, the narrative story that is being given to us in Revelation is a retelling of Joshua's battle, or Yeshua's battle, at Jericho. When I was working on my dissertation and I was reading the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Greek translation of Joshua is Jesus. And so I'm reading, that's when I read my New Testament, that's what we see is Jesus. It's very direct, and so you can't miss it, the connection. And all the way through, the one that is conducting the battle is Jesus, it's Jesus. So how is it that becomes the story? And I'm suggesting that will explain a lot of the drama that's going on in Revelation. I want to do that by way of this picture. One of my students was a gifted artist, and so he prepared this to help me to communicate this story. I think if you know the account of the story, you'll recognize immediately a lot of the points, but I want to point them out to you and maybe help you with that if I can. This is Joshua conquers Jericho. I'm going to tell it going from right to left, the original story from the book of Joshua. Then I'm going to turn around and come from left to right and tell you the story of Revelation, using the same symbols, same themes, and I think that will help give you some confidence in what we're trying to do. With respect to Joshua and Jericho, we have the river here, the Jordan, and what's significant there are the 12 stones. You may remember that when they crossed the Jordan, Joshua had the tribal chieftains take riverbed stones from the water that divided, and they piled them up when they came into the land as a memorial that God had given them their inheritance. They had passed through the waters of baptism and death, and now they were in the land, they were in their inheritance. And they piled up these 12 riverbed stones, ordinary stones, and they called the name of the place Gilgal. Why? Galal in Hebrew means to roll. You'll know that word from Golgotha. It's a skull. It rolls. That's the idea of the place of the skull. Where Goliath of Gath, his skull was buried, the place of the skull, where David buried it, and where the Lord was crucified. Why is Gilgal significant? At Gilgal, Joshua corrected what Moses had not done. He had not circumcised the generation that came out of Egypt for 40 years. And because they were unclean, ritually, they had neglected to observe Passover. So they're unclean. And he knows he has to take this city, walled up against God. He can't go around it, he has to take it in order for the people to achieve their inheritance. So what Joshua is setting up is a holy war. The men have to be circumcised, and then they have to participate in Passover, and then they are competent to fight this holy war. It's a war that's going to take place against the great city, walled up against God, walled up to heaven. And it is a wealthy city. There was gold, there was silver, and there was a garment from Shinar. And Shinar is the place in Mesopotamia where Babylon is. So there was a commercial relationship with Babylon. That's not insignificant. Very wealthy city. And in it, there is this whorish woman, Rahab. Rahab is significant for a number of reasons. She was plying her trade. That's why the young men went into her house, because No questions would be asked. They were finding refuge in the house of a harlot. And she had scarlet and linen, which was the dress of a woman in that particular line of commerce. There is a famous whore that lives in this city. And Israel is going to war against it. So they are prepared once the people are purified. Joshua is walking around the city at night, wondering what his battle plan will be. These are newly released slaves, or 40 years before they'd been slaves. They have no siege equipment. They have very few weapons. How are they going to take this city? How are they going to conquer it? And he knows that there's no way. We'll see why that's significant. So he sees the commander of the host of the Lord, who has come from heaven. And he goes up to him and he says, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the answer he gets is very instructive. You have to know the answer to that question. The angel says, "No." Why? You've got to know why. Joshua doesn't do anything but fall down and worship. He does exactly what Moses did at Sinai. He takes his sandals off his feet because he's standing on holy ground. The angel of the commander of the host of the Lord is the same Lord God who had met Moses in the burning bush. And God had said, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you." So the angel comes with the sword drawn. That's very important. And he gives him the battle plan. The battle plan will be executed as soon as Joshua spies out the city. He sends in 2 witnesses, 2 spies to go into the city to reconnoiter, to survey what's going on there. And that's a story in and of itself, filled with gospel. They are identified, and the king puts them under a decree of death. They find refuge in the house of the harlot.
Okay, so just real quick, as I'm thinking about this, and let me know what you think, because I'm not 100% sure I even believe this, but Rahab, the prostitute, the unfaithful woman, ends up being the means through which God saves these 2 spies, these 2 people of Israel who are coming in. Now, the 2 spies obviously reappear in the book of Revelation. So who is the bride? In the book of Revelation, the whore of Babylon appears. So you can see the connection that Dr. Warren Gage is making. Is it possible that it is the bride of Christ who is then used to be the means through which Israel receives the promise that God had originally given to Abraham, that it is actually the bride of Christ who is being transformed from the prostitute to the bride, to the faithful bride? Now, I know there's Old Testament references there as well, as far as the prostitute, the unfaithful spouse of Yahweh, but it just struck me that that's not something that Dr. Warren Gage connects, but as I'm listening to him again, it's like, maybe.
And but the king has sent his soldiers to find them, and they go to her house, and Rahab deflects them, sends them away. First, she takes the spies up on her roof where she is drying out flaxseed. She hides them under these stalks of flax. It's an emblematic burial. She deflects the soldiers and says, "Run down to the ford of the Jordan. They were here, but they've left." And she lies, and she's called Righteous Rahab. There's a reason for that. So they go down to the Jordan, and she tells the spies, "Go up to the mountain, the Coratania mountain, which is behind Jericho. If you ever go there, you'll see it. It's the Mount of the Temptation, by the way. Go up to the mountain and stay there for 3 days. After 3 days, you can safely cross the Jordan and be reunited with Yeshua." So 2 spies are under a sentence of death, emblematically buried, delivered, hidden for 3 days, reappear on the 3rd day, and are reunited with Joshua. Anyone hear anything in that? There's so many of these stories in this material. Rahab has nothing to commend her, nothing. She is a Canaanitess. Do you know what Noah had said to the Canaanites? Noah had cursed them. She is an Amorite. Moses, in the law, had commanded the Amorites to be put to death, slaughtered. She is following a profession that is antithetical to the holiness of God. She has nothing to commend her except one thing: saving faith. Somehow God had given her faith to believe in what he had done. They had heard the report of what God had done against the Egyptians at the Red Sea, and she believed in the Lord God. She had saving faith. So with that, she bargained with these two spies and delivered them from death. And they made a covenant with her. What's the significance of the covenant? The covenant trumps the law and the curse. The covenant is more powerful than the curse of Noah and the law of Moses. A covenant is a covenant of salvation. There is mercy to be had in the covenant. The covenant respected her door. And I want to talk to you about that door. That's very significant. Anyone inside her door, all her household, which was quite large, by the way, it turns out, would be saved. All of those outside her door were subject to death. So, the battle plan was 3 series of 7s. I call them telescopic because you can pull them out, like you do with a telescope. The 7th one of the first series becomes 7 new ones, and that 7th one then becomes 7 new ones. The people are to march around the city once a day for 7 days. Why did God have them do that? I think the Lord was showing his people, you can't take this city, but I can give it to you. That's a lesson. That's a very important lesson. It's all of grace. The covenant overcomes the law and the curse. The Lord can give us that which is impossible, and he promises to give us what he ordains as our inheritance. On the 7th march, on the 7th day, they march around the city 7 times. 7 times on the 7th day. And the priests are carrying trumpets, and the Ark of God is following after them, representing the presence of the Lord. And on the 7th march, the priests sound 7 trumpets. 7 trumpets is always the sign of holy war. We know that because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of the scrolls is the Marshall Scroll. It's a war scroll. And in that scroll, there are the sounding of 7 trumpets. The trumpets are named. Trumpet of the assembly, a trumpet of the advance. The last trumpet is significant. Paul speaks in Corinthians, remember, at the sounding of the last trumpet, it's a trumpet septenary. That means there's 7 trumpets. The last trumpet is when the transfer takes place, the collapse takes place. So they sound 7 trumpets, and all the camp shouts, and the walls fall flat, and they go directly in front of themselves to take the city, to sack it. But before they can destroy the city, which is consigned to death and fire, before they can do that, Joshua commands, bring out Rahab and her household. The people of God are always an Exodus people. We're always called out from something. Abraham was called out of Ur. Lot was called out of Sodom. The people of God are called out of Egypt. Rahab is going to be called out of this lifestyle. And she's represented down here praising God. Her scarlet robe that she had used to entice men had been made into a rope. She used it simply to lower the spies. But she's been delivered from judgment and death, brought out, and she's given a crown. Why? She was brought outside the camp, which is the language that's used in Hebrews. You'll recall that. Why the writer of Hebrews says, let us also go outside the camp, identifying the people of God with Rahab. Let us go outside of the camp. Christ was taken outside of the camp, by the way. And she is engrafted into the people of God, marries into the family of Solomon, who is of the genealogy of Judah, which is the royal tribe, and she becomes an ancestral mother of David and of Christ, a Canaanite. What a beautiful picture of redemption. Matthew makes much of that. All these women that he weaves into his genealogy have some affiliation, some connection to something unclean or Gentile. So she's a picture. You can see why she's so prominent to the fathers of the church and into the New Testament, why she's such an example of faith. She represents the span of God's redemption. This is what salvation looks like. She goes from a curse, a condemnation, a lifestyle that is an abomination to the holiness of God, and becomes a royal bride in the house of the Lord God.
Well, there's obviously a whole lot more that we could say here. I just love this story again of Rahab, the book of, again, tying the book of Revelation in, again, for me, lends a lot of credibility to this idea, not just of the Messiah, son of Joseph, but that the Messiah is this son of Joseph and son of David, that it's not one or the other, but it's both. It might even be more than that. We haven't talked about Melchizedek, but this Rahab, again, if I'm thinking about this, is if Rahab in a way is like the church, is like the bride of Christ. Of course, she becomes married into Israel. She rescues Israel. And again, going back to Ephraim and Manasseh, the lesser becomes the blessing for the greater. The Gentile woman actually becomes the means through which Israel is rescued. Israel, in that sense, just took over, or just sort of Egypt was conquered. Paul writes this, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Is there something to that? That in this story of Rahab, Israel is following God, and they're following God's promise, and they're living for the promise, or they're looking to the promise at least. And then Rahab becomes aware of the promise because of what God has done through Israel. But Israel can't take the city. And so God uses Rahab. Is that part of what Paul is saying? I mean, he works this out all throughout Romans, but in 11, they did not stumble as to fall, did they? May it never be, but by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Now, if their transgression is riches of the world and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fulfillment will be? That salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Rahab got it. In the ears of Rahab, the trumpets that sounded judgment were actually the trumpets of her salvation and her deliverance. So, Amy, going back to the clip at the beginning with Jacob, the idea that the Messiah has not yet come, we haven't been delivered yet. Is it possible that our deliverance to some sounds like judgment, sounds like chaos? There's something to that. I mean, we could go into this. It's like one of those, Dr. Gage talks about it as like a telescope. I've talked about it as like a fractal pattern. And there's so much that now there's a whole thing in Revelation about the foundation stones and corresponding to the breastplate of the high priest. We won't have time to go into it, but again, it just touches on the theme of God bringing the nations and the stones, and I'll leave a link to this one, but what Dr. Gage is going to point out is that all of these stones were quarried from particular parts of the globe. And so as they would bring these stones for the breastplate of the priest, they would bring them from all over the world. And then as Jesus is building the city of God in the book of Revelation, he's using those same stones. And so he's drawing, yet again, the nations together. And so I actually want to, and kind of along those lines, I actually want to maybe close this out with Jacob. We started with Jacob. We might close it out with Jacob. He had Father Stephen DeYoung on, and they were talking about a video that I did with a friend of mine, David, and the idea of Christians sort of trying to become Jewish is not a new one. I mean, the New Testament deals with this idea. As Christians, do we need to become Jews first? Is that how you fit into the promise of God or the fulfillment of the promise? And the answer is ultimately no. I mean, I think we're kind of touching on this, that the the Christian tradition is not a tradition of Judaism. It's not just looking at the tribe of Judah at the beginning. That's what I was trying to say, is that maybe we've made a mistake in overemphasizing Jesus as King, Son of David. Not that he's not that, but that because we're fixated on his kingship and his descendancy from David, we've overlooked this whole other thread that maybe would be even more beneficial to talk about in a sort of multicultural, multi-religious setting where you have Jews, you have Protestants. Father Stephen DeYoung is Orthodox. And so we have this community of people who are all coming at this from a slightly different angle. And I wonder if maybe Jesus as the Son of David is something of a stumbling block, which he predicted it would be. And so I'm curious to know maybe how Jacob or some of our friends who come from the Jewish tradition would engage with the idea of Messiah, son of Joseph, which I'm sure they have in the past, but I'd like to hear that.
It looked like you got triggered by some trans Jews.
Well, so David actually teaches about a Bible study on my channel.
Okay.
So, like, I love the man, but he was having a discussion on a different channel. And, like, he is kind of like, yeah, we as Christians should be keeping the holidays, the Jewish holidays, the Old Testament holidays, and it was kind of like I almost was like, Father Stephen, take this.
Trans Jews.
Yeah.
They dress as Jews, they present as Jews, they claim to be Jews, they identify as Jews. Actual Jews say they're not Jews. They're like their parents, they're like boomer parents, sold their Christian heritage for a massive pottage, right? And so they've been completely cut off from like the Christian tradition on all these things. Like they don't have any connection to Christian festivals and holidays, right? I'm sure if I asked him, what about the Christian celebration of Passover? He wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Right? And so when they've been completely cut off from that and they don't understand what that is and how it relates to the Jewish traditions that Christianity came out of, then when they try to find some tradition to connect to, they try to sort of leapfrog, not backwards to Second Temple Judaism, but like laterally to present day Judaism to try to find a sense of tradition.
Well, leaving aside the fact that I think Father Stephen DeYoung called me a trans Jew, I think David took the brunt of the criticism here. And ultimately, I think, it doesn't seem like Father Stephen DeYoung watched our video. He was catching up with Jacob's live stream. So I'd be curious to maybe get his feedback on that, because his characterization of what a trans Jew is, people that sort of want to look the part and act the part, but aren't really. It's not what I'm trying to do. And although I have come across people that do operate that way, my hope is that we're actually discovering something. I don't know what to say about that. I did a video featuring Tim Mackey, where part of it was talking about progressive revelation, and what Tim pointed out and what I tried to emphasize in that was that we're not talking about anything we're not adding anything new to what we believe is a closed canon, that God has revealed himself in these particular texts. But as we read those texts, it seems like there's more being yielded over time. And over time, we understand the texts more clearly. Now, that's what I'm hoping to do. But again, I think Father Stephen DeYoung's point is true. Some people try to move sort of laterally to try to understand their Christianity by looking at sort of modern day Judaism. And so that's why I think the emphasis following the prophecy from Joseph to Ephraim to Joshua to Jesus, fulfilling that in the book of Revelation, and I think fulfilling it here and now. Again, I think Christianity is taking a little bit more of a difficult line in that we are saying Jesus is the Messiah and the King, and he's also the sacrificial lamb. He's also the one who came and died and laid down his life. And so I can understand the tension here where it doesn't really look like sort of the Messiah has come and has put everything right. And I think, again, ultimately that has to do with our expectation of who the Messiah is. And if we're just looking for the Son of David, we'll miss the fact that he has come not as the Son of David and as the son of Joshua, he is Joshua, the son of Joseph. So I found that interesting. And if you're here at the end and you found that interesting, let me know what you think and share it with your friends and carry on the conversation. That's what I hope to do. Hope to spur on more and more conversation. And so when we do, I'll catch you in the next one.